distinguished panel and guests who joined from near and far on behalf of Baylor University's Institute for the Studies of Religion and Keston Center for Religion, Politics, and Society. Welcome to Facing Forward, Afghanistan After America. The acts of terror perpetrated on September 11, 2001 have left an indelible mark on the history of the United States and upon the collective memory of our nation. The wars that followed in Iraq and in Afghanistan have affected each of us. Brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, cousins, and friends have given of themselves, even of their very lives, in defense of our nation and for the cause of freedom. The cost has been borne by us all. This is even more true for the Iraqi and Afghan people, soldiers, and leaders who have stood with us in the pursuit of a better world. Before beginning our panel today and introducing our speakers, I would like to take a moment of silence to recognize the solemnity of this event and of the subjects we will discuss today. So please join me in a moment of silence. The withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan has been a pressing concern, not only for our current president, but for previous ones as well. But the recent developments and the pace by which these have progressed seem to have caught most of us by surprise. In our panel today, we will explore the events that have unfolded in Afghanistan over the past few weeks with a view towards the future of this tumultuous region. Though there's an abundance of news, many of us are seeking a greater depth of understanding about the situation in the region today, the events that have led to the present circumstances, and for perspectives on what might be to come. I would like to begin today by briefly introducing each of our panelists, and then we will turn our attention to Mrs. Fawzia Kufi, who will be our first speaker, who will be leading in our program today. We are honored to have today, as I mentioned, Mrs. Kufi, who is a former member of parliament in Kabul, former vice president of the National Assembly in Afghanistan, and has been a current and is a current member of the Afghan delegation negotiating peace with the Taliban. She's a women's rights activist and the author of The Favored Daughter, One Woman's Fight to Lead Afghanistan into the Future. We will also be joined today by Mr. Aref Dostiar, who is the Consul General of Afghanistan for the Western part of the United States. He is the former Director General of International Relations and Regional Cooperation for Afghanistan and former Director of Peace and Reconciliation at the Office of National Security Council. And then we're also joined by Ambassador Jonathan Addleton, who is a senior civilian representative to Southern Afghanistan, head of USAID in Pakistan and India, ambassador to Mongolia, and now current rector, that is president of Foreman Christian College in Lahore, Pakistan. We are extremely honored to have each of you with us today, and we look forward to hearing from you and to learning from your perspective and from the depth of your experience. Thank you. I would now invite Mrs. Kufi to address us.
Thank you so much, Charles, and I must thank the Baylor University and my friend also Aref Dostiar for inviting me to this webinar. Although everyone almost in Afghanistan is under extreme mental pressure for what has happened to our country, and we continue to blame ourselves and blame those who actually contributed to this situation, which doesn't change much. But as you can imagine, for somebody who have invested the time, energy, and also the blood in the past 20 years, to see everything fall apart in such a rapid manner, and we are and under extremely uncertainty and also lack of cohesion and strong leadership to move forward. That being said, I think the way forward, apparently the opportunities are shrinking, because only a year ago, when the negotiations started in the same month, September, with the Taliban, our hope was that we will come to a political settlement which will bring Taliban as one reality of Afghanistan into a political structure, but also other political groups and women and others into the political structure. And we are able to establish a system that is acceptable. A little bit of change was also, accommodative. We were ready to bring a little bit of change, if not Islamic Republic, probably an Islamic government, but not Emirates. Something like that was kind of crossing our minds, and we discussed about this. But the baseline for everything was that we need to actually make sure that the rights and liberties of individuals are respected. Of course, the US elections happened, and people, mainly the Taliban side, were waiting to see what the election results will be, who will be the winner in the United States election. After the new administration, everyone was waiting for the new administration's policy and strategy towards Afghanistan. But in April, we all know that President Biden announced unconditional withdrawal from Afghanistan by September. So that gave actually Taliban already, a position that they thought that they will win militarily, and boost their morale. On the other hand, it actually demoralized the forces in Afghanistan, the political community, and also the president, basically, who was also favored by United States. We all remember that in 2014, this president that was not an election winner, he was given elections by a political consensus or a political, agreement led by John Kerry, the former state secretary of the United States. So that situation actually put everyone at a very difficult situation. And I remember when the day that the United States forces were leaving Bagram Air Base, the same day, a lot of forces actually from where I come from Northeast, were leaving their own bases, our security forces, going to Tajikistan, fleeing to Tajikistan, which is the closest border country. Everything changed very quickly, and we are now in a situation that the Taliban took over militarily. I must say that in many places, there was no military confrontation. The Taliban went, and before even the Taliban go to any particular area, the security forces actually already fled the area without any real threat. So the Taliban took over very easily, I guess, in many places, including Kabul. There were many reasons. I mentioned the main one, which was the US president announcement of withdrawal. So it resulted to takeover of military takeover by Taliban, and unfortunately, the negotiations that we had hoped so much to take us to a better location politically did not take the speed they required, and no result. Although we're still trying as the way forward that there should be a government which is inclusive, representing the socio, ethnicity fabric of Afghanistan, the woman above all, so that we could move this transition period. Just before the takeover of Kabul, we were preparing for a last round of negotiation in Doha to agree on a political settlement which is temporary, That means that the president, the former president, will actually hand over the power to an interim setup. But the former president did not wait for that and left the country, flee the country. And Taliban actually came in a vacuum of power. Even now is a vacuum of power. And you have seen the situation on the ground. Although the Taliban claim that they have, that they are more moderate, and I have been engaged with them now for 4 years. Some of them pretend to be moderate because they have been exposed to a lot of international trips, international, exposures. But those who are on the ground, unfortunately, remain the same. Mainly, they are using boys as young as 25 years old and below. And those young boys have very little or no education. They hold a gun, and through a gun, they have found identity, political identity, or even a social identity, power. So for them to detach from that political and social identity is going to be a challenge. And that's why they're using that gun to expose the same extreme situation on the society, on the woman, on the minorities, on the rest of the community. And I think, if in a positive note, if the Taliban agreed to establishment of a broad-based and inclusive government, which is something very unlikely, hopefully there will be women, although they clearly say that they don't want women in their cabinet. But if there are international pressures and the leverage is used internationally to agree on that, then things will be better than where we are now. But everyone, however, the concern is that that they will actually get engaged with their political differences that they have right now. They are divided. There is different groups of the Taliban, the Haqqanis, the Taliban from Kandahar, and the rest of the Taliban. So there is a division. Everybody within the Taliban try to get to the most senior positions, and that is an indication of that probably to establish an inclusive representative government is not something that to the expectation of the people of Afghanistan. And in that case, I think it is not only people who have announced that they will fight against Taliban, but there will be a lot of social resistance against Taliban. Internationally, I think they're in seek of getting international recognition. They're trying their utmost to get international recognition. Now, moving forward, if they are able to meet those promises that they have had, I think there are countries and individuals that are working to give Taliban the recognition that they want. But in the meantime, we have to watch carefully. I think we have to watch, especially their link with other military extremist groups. Remember that in 2001, the military extremist groups that were operating in Afghanistan were not to the extent that we have them now. I stop here, and then if there are questions, I would be very happy to engage myself in the, as moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we will come back to you after hearing from each of our panelists. And thank you for your perception, for your perspective. For those who don't know, Mrs. Kufi was in Afghanistan, and only within the past couple of days left the country and is speaking to us today.
Yeah, only 24 hours since I actually came to Doha, and still my mind and heart and everything, including my family member, is in Afghanistan. So I still feel like, I have not really, and it's not easy to adjust. Probably I won't be able to adjust until I go back, which hopefully will be soon.
We are extremely honored to have you here with us. And we can only imagine what it was like for you to leave Afghanistan only 24 hours ago and still find time to be with us here today. Thank you so much. Let me turn now to Mr. Aref Dostiar, who's been working as a diplomat here in the United States, but was before that working in Kabul within the government. Would you share some of your perspectives? What is the situation here in the US now? And then as you look back on your role in peace negotiations there, maybe what went wrong, or what do you think might come forward from this?
Thank you so much, Professor Ramsey. I am really honored to be here and share a panel also with Mrs. Kufi. I'm really grateful she was able to join us today. And I'm also glad to be sharing this panel with Ambassador Adelton. Thank you, Charles. This is a very personal matter for all of us from Afghanistan. Sometimes it's difficult to get our heads around it because it's not just a piece of analysis. It's not theory, but it's real life for us. Our families are there, our friends are there, our lives are there, and it's our country. I feel like I'm locked outside. Over the past year, I have tried several times to visit Afghanistan due to different reasons of my responsibilities here and COVID and many other things did not allow me. And I was scheduled to go to Kabul with a group of my American friends on August 16th, but on August 15th, Kabul fell. And so it has been an emotional couple of weeks for us. But I would like to maybe focus on 2 or 3 things today. Number one is that I have written in the past and discussed this, is that there is no military solution to the problem in Afghanistan. And I see these days that some people talk about it and say, look, that theory has proven wrong. I think that seizure of power is not peace. And when we say that there is no military solution, that means that even if you win a war, you may not be able to establish peace in Afghanistan. And the end of war is not the beginning of peace in our country. Unfortunately, the war has not ended. Maybe parts of it ended in the country, but the war itself has not ended, let alone establishing peace. And I think that that's an important piece to keep in mind as we also move forward. The second point is that we need to deal with the complexity of this context. It's not just about unseating, it's not just about taking power, but we need to deal with a multifaceted context in Afghanistan. There are definitely domestic elements to this, but to say that this is just a civil war is, I think, oversimplifying the problem and the issue and the conflict in Afghanistan. There are many layers that we need to take into consideration when we deal with this context and try to address it. At least, and these are some of the things that we have talked about in the past, and I think that they are still relevant, is that you need to deal at least in 4 different levels if we to be able to establish peace. We need to deal at local levels, at village levels. There are systems that need to be established, and there are grievances that need to be addressed. And then at the national level, we need institutions. We need an inclusive government. We need an inclusive and broad-based leadership that can address, that can represent all of Afghanistan, all different factions of the people of Afghanistan, and address the problems that we have and set the country on the right course. At the national level, that political consensus that also Mrs. Kufi mentioned earlier is of utmost importance. And then there are also regional and global dynamics to this conflict that we have to take into consideration. We just cannot do without them. We need to move from a proxy mindset to a mindset where we see our collective interest in Afghanistan. I have talked about taking more of an economic centric approach to Afghanistan. Most of the time, we look at Afghanistan as a place where we do counterterrorism work, where we think only about security. And maybe there are other ways to ameliorate security in the country. And one way is to look at our interests as a region, and particularly our economic interests, our shared values, and what we can gain from a stable Afghanistan. If we look at it that way, maybe that will also contribute to a more stable country there. At the global level as well, we need to move from a competition mindset toward more cooperation in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan can be a very good place for global powers, even though they have rivalries and differences in other places. Afghanistan could be a great place of cooperation because they have common interest in Afghanistan. Number one thing is the threats that are emanating from that country as a result of so many terrorist organizations that operate along the lines between Afghanistan and also Pakistan. So what I would like to say is that a linear thinking of saying if we do A, that will lead to B, and B will lead to C, does not necessarily work in our country. I don't think that works anywhere, but particularly in the complex context of Afghanistan, that does not work. For example, if we say that let's go and take over the government, will we be able to hold it? Will we be able to run it? For instance, right now we are facing enormous economic challenges. IMF, the World Bank, the United States, all of our international donors have stopped funding the country. So now how are we going to run this country? All the banks are, even though recently in the past day or so, they have opened, but they are not able to operate fully. And people are facing major challenges. In addition to these issues, we have these incidents of the past 2 weeks also led to massive internal displacement among people. One figure I looked, I think was by the UN, is more than 500,000 people have been displaced. There are only about 250,000 families in Kabul alone. And that's a lot of people. There, we are seeing also a brain drain. Many people are trying to escape the country. There's the COVID-19 issue that's still going on that is not getting enough attention. There are also more grievances out there that need to be addressed. So you cannot say that if we get to this seat, we will be able, everything else will be great. What I'm saying is that this is a much more complex, more like a machine, that if you touch one part of it, all the other parts would be impacted. And that's what's happening in our country. One more point I would like to share and then get back to you, Professor Ramsey, is you asked about the role of the region in your questions. I think that most, maybe except 1 or 2 countries, are worried and concerned about the situation. And again, the reason is that there is common threat that emanates from Afghanistan. There are at least 4 categories of terrorist organizations, unfortunately, that have been active in the country for the past at least couple of decades. There are many of these groups are not there to necessarily threaten Afghans. They are there to threaten their countries of origin, and they are there to threaten the global community. And so all the regional countries have a reason to be concerned, and they also need to do something about it. Violent extremist groups have already become emboldened because of what's happened. And so the situation poses grave concern, great a threat to the region, as well as the global community. But it seems like maybe not one country can step up, but there are organizations that need to come together. For instance, the United Nations, for instance, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that need to come up and become more active. I will leave it at that, and I'm happy to engage more later.
Thank you very much for your insightful comments, drawing attention to the diversity within the country and the regional situation. Ambassador Adelton, joining us from Lahore, Pakistan. Thank you so much. We look forward to hearing your words.
Thank you, Charles. I appreciate the opportunity to be here as well for all kinds of reasons. I think what I'll do is I'll tend to follow the format that you had suggested in terms of a few questions, starting with introduction of myself. As Charles mentioned, I'm the rector president of Foreman Christian College, a Stark College going back to the 1860s. And actually a lot of leading people over the years have attended Foreman, so it still has that positive reputation to this day. I was born and raised in Pakistan. I took my first trip to Afghanistan in 1958, which I don't remember because I was about a year old, but subsequently I visited Afghanistan and Kabul in particular in the 60s and the 70s. Then I had a hiatus for 20 years, but also again in the first decade of the 2000s and then the second decade. At that time, I was serving as the senior civilian representative in southern Afghanistan. At that time, it still had a fairly strong U.S. presence in terms of some of these towns will be familiar: Kandahar City, Horn of Panjwai, Arghandab, Spin Boldak, Tarankot, and had amazing mobility. Actually, traveled a lot, met people from all over Afghanistan, from all over southern Afghanistan. This was 4 specific provinces that I worked in: Kandahar, Zabul, Uruzgan, and Dayakundi. Again, those that know the geography will know that Dayakundi is where the Hazara population of Afghanistan is centered, other places as well. But it was interesting because before taking on that assignment in Afghanistan, I had been the US ambassador to Mongolia. And in fact, I had met a number of Afghans in Mongolia that had come back. The Mongolian Foreign Ministry had run a program for diplomats from Afghanistan. Issues of landlocked country with powerful neighbors kind of resonated. And I also met some Hazara students who had studied at local universities. Again, I'm saying this because of the connections involved are far greater and far more perhaps interesting, far more complex than people might realize. I also like to say in terms of that southern Afghanistan, we talking about the US, but very much an international effort. That included meeting soldiers in ISAF from several Muslim countries, including Bosnia, Albania, and Jordan. Romanians were there in a big way as well, and of course the US presence was strong there. I was there during the hinge point, if you will, from what President Obama called the shift from a combat role to a training role. And even in terms of the Americans, when I first arrived, we were about 130 civilians, State Department, Foreign Service people in about 14 locations. And by the time I left, we were down to 40 in one location, Kandahar Airfield. So there had been some kind of a drawdown, although I think, my goodness, we had a year to do that. Such a comparison, I suppose, with what's happening more recently in terms of in terms of Afghanistan. Also, and some of these comments, I guess, relate to the second question, which was posed: is what do you think Americans should keep in mind when watching the news? I think first and foremost, they should keep in mind the suffering of the Afghans. 20 years, we call it, longest war, never-ending war, 20-year war. Arguably, the war for Afghanistan began in '79, or maybe it began in '73. But there's been almost half a century of violence, and just the challenges, the wreckage even on society when you go through so many decades of violence. So I think that would be part of it. And I said the suffering. People say in the U.S., I've obviously been reading some of these op-eds. Where's the sacrifice? Well, the sacrifice was when I was in Kandahar. 4 of the 5 military combat deaths in southern Afghanistan were Afghan soldiers, and indeed 60,000 Afghan soldiers have paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I think that one has to recognize that. Again, getting on to what Americans should think. I think one of the things is the situation changes fast. When I was asked to participate in this panel, I did not imagine, and that was only 3 weeks ago. I didn't imagine the situation as it would be today. Of course, the conflict is not over just because somebody announces it. It's not the end of the war. The conflict's going to continue in various ways, and that's sort of what we're talking about, is how this is going to unfold. Again, advice to Americans. One of them is don't believe sound bites. This gets broader than just Afghanistan, but I believe that the politics by soundbite. I know there's a lot of political speechwriters that are very happy about their speeches, and they write memorable sound bites, and people, I suppose that's what gravitates to politics, oftentimes to toxic politics. One of the expressions that you've heard all the time, although I actually understand it was only coined after 9/11, the graveyard of empires. Actually, if you look at the historical record, Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan and the Kushans and the Ghaznavids and the Timurid empires, they all interacted with Afghanistan in different ways, and it wasn't a graveyard. It was a different kind of interaction that over time has made the fabric of Afghanistan what it is today. Of course, I've said about sound bites, and I'm going to say one sound bite of my own right now, which is, for some reason, long wars somehow seem to lead to short memories and even amnesia. I think a lot of Americans perhaps forget 9/11 after 9/11, when the invasion in Afghanistan occurred. Again, it wasn't just a U.S. effort, it was a united effort of many countries. ISAF, of course, one of their out-of-theater operations was Afghanistan, but it enjoyed great support, meaning 90% plus support in the early years. Of course, as the years dragged on, it became more difficult. And in recent events, clearly some people are, with a sigh of relief, we're out of here. But again, Afghans are not out of there. There's a lot of Afghans there, and that's that's certainly part of it. This is just a statistic that may surprise people, but up until the death of 13 American soldiers at Kabul airport, it had been 18 months since there had been an American combat casualty. And in fact, those 13 on that one day surpassed the annual casualty list of American soldiers in 6 of the last 7 years. So, again, there's different images people have of Afghanistan, but it's not 20 years of the same. It's been shifts, and by the way, anybody that's been to Kabul or even Kandahar, for that matter, I've served, will realize things have changed fundamentally, actually, and that's what the Taliban inherits. So the third question was, what do you think about the U.S. and Taliban? What happens next between the two? Clearly, there's some experience in negotiation. Clearly, there's some experience with talking. It wasn't official, but I think back in the day when I was in Kandahar, I was speaking with people in the countryside, and again, I had amazing mobility that clearly were sympathetic to all spectrums of the Afghan political spectrum as well as society. But the reality, of course, is winning wars, like winning elections, is the easy part. The tough part is governing. That still lies ahead. In fact, the Taliban haven't formed a government yet. It's being talked about. We'll see what happens in the coming days. I think a lot of diplomats, of course, or a lot of embassies and a lot of foreign ministries are having this wait and see attitude at this point. Previously, Afghanistan Taliban government was recognized by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. It'll be interesting to see. I think there'll be coordination among different countries. And again, I think it's kind of wait and see. Although I think it was mentioned earlier, at some level you think, my goodness, Taliban, this is an opportunity for you. It'll be interesting to see if they take it in terms of the rhetoric actually happening. And again, there's a lot of skepticism about that. But I tell people I always find hope wherever I find it, wherever I can find it, and I still hope there's situations there. The last thing is just situation on the ground in Pakistan. As was mentioned, I'm located in Pakistan now. I've had long time ties to Pakistan, and I think it's awkward sometime because there's difficulties in the relationship. But I think I have empathy wherever I am, and so I have empathy on all sides. Pakistan, I would describe the atmosphere as quite sober, actually, which might surprise people. I think that the disintegration of the government occurred more quickly than they thought. I think that they realized that a stable Afghanistan is good for the region. The short answer about what now in Pakistan, I don't know. But again, I would say it's a sober assessment. I would say that there was surprise. I would say that there was some maybe self-congratulations that we understood the situation in our neighboring country better than people from 10,000 miles away. But again, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's key. I saw pictures this morning of Spin Boldak, people trying to leave. official announcements is the border is not really open for refugees. And so again, that's part of the dynamic as well. But undoubtedly there'll be Afghans in Pakistan. There were Afghans that grew up in Pakistan as refugees going back to the 1980s. The wonderful Afghan national cricket team owes something to its time in Afghanistan, and they really are very competitive on the international scale, on the international cricket pitch. And I very much hope that the Taliban keeps these teams going, both men and women's teams. I think that's a unifying factor for Afghanistan. And maybe I'll end with that. I used to look at our soldiers in Afghanistan, and they would have their names, and in our country, you can tell people come from all over the world because of their last names. And I won't go through them, but this person from Asia, this person from Africa, this person from Latin America, Pacific Islanders, whatever. And I would ask Afghans too, when they saw the names on their soldiers' uniforms, or when they saw the names in the back of their cricket uniforms, what did they think? And I think it did evoke a feeling of being Afghan, which I think is something else that's different over the past 20 years. So Charles, took a little bit longer, but I hope it's okay. And again, these are more personal reflections, but thank you for bringing us all together.
We're grateful to you. That was very insightful. I would like to go back to Mrs. Kufi and offer her the opportunity to share some from her own experiences, perhaps from her negotiation times with the Taliban, or we would like to hear what it's like and what do you see as the situation for women in Afghanistan. But we would, of course, like to hear whatever you would prefer to share with us. So please join us now, Mrs. Kufi.
Thank you, Charles. Actually, when I engaged with Taliban through dialogue and negotiations in 2019, I was criticized domestically for talking to a group which was portrayed to us as terrorists. A lot of women rights activists, civil society groups criticized me for helping to reconstruct the Taliban's face or image. Well, the reason for me was that it's always easy to talk and exchange views and agree with a group that you're same-minded, but with a group that there is a huge difference to that extent that they are ready to kill another human being because of political differences. It is not easy. So it's important that we engage with them. And if we are talking and claiming that Afghanistan has transformed in the past 20 years, part of that transformation is the women and younger generation of the society, then the Taliban must realize that, women are an unavoidable part of the society. They must talk to them, they must engage with them, and they must make sure that, the country will not move without including women. And so therefore they must include women or engage with them and accept them as a citizen. Eventually in 2020, the official negotiations started. In the negotiation room, I actually received the same level of respect that the male colleagues of mine were receiving. And of course, it's always hard as a woman because, I had to really engage myself in the dialogue and negotiation with more preparation, with more data, accuracy, and logic, comparing to my male colleagues, because I didn't want the Taliban to question my presence as a symbol of women's rights, but not as a meaningful, participation. Over the past 9 months or so, sometimes I have been the only in the negotiation room. I think we have come to this understanding that the Taliban believe that without women, it's not possible. That was my hope, that was my expectation. However, when they took over in, that Kabul fall, they started from some of the provinces. And as I said before, in some of those provinces, actually, they asked the woman to wear burqa going out, to have a male companion. They call it mahram in, our language, when they go to the doctor. So these are the same practices that they did before. When they took over Kabul, around 30,000 prisoners, most of them criminals also, not only Taliban, but criminals of other sorts, were released from prisons. And so they engaged in, along with, it was difficult to differentiate who is doing what, but they engaged in, searching people's houses, looting the houses, extrajudiciary killing, unlawful punishment, and all sorts of those things. Personally, also, although I was in the negotiation, I And I knew that they are not going to harm me because I think they know that it's going to be very costly for them internationally, nationally, etc. But still, they attempted to ban my movements a little bit. I, put their security outside my house and control who is coming to my house, who is going out. And their justification was that we do this because we don't know who is doing what and we don't take responsibility. There are a lot of criminals released from prison. Along with me, other women's rights activists or politicians also faced the same. But in general, people were terrified with the collapse of everything so rapidly. And they were also and they continue to be very, very hopeless. So the scenes the images that you have seen at the airport, which probably some of your politicians must be proud of that, their evacuation, but for us, it was a mental torture to see that, how the Afghans were treated, especially when, the two bomb explosions, suicide bombing, that the ISIS claimed responsibility, as a result of which tens of Afghans lost lives, but 13, the US Marine also. Our hearts and prayers are with those and sympathy with the families. But it was even more heartbreaking to see that in the international mainstream media, the headline was 13 US Marines lost life, but not 200 Afghans that actually were killed as a result of the poorly managed evacuation. There were much better ways to do this, but this was not properly managed. So this was another, kind of insult, I would say, to us. So the airport was just in front of the eyes of international community, media, international media were there. If you look at the borders, Ambassador Jonathan just mentioned, the Spin Buldak or other borders moving. I mean, Iran and Pakistan mainly because they are open borders, or there are always a way of illegal migration. But even people are queuing up in the borders to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And the main fear is two. One is that, if there is no political settlement or a government which is broad-based and everybody is represented and internationally recognized, then the alternative would be, once again, a power-centric government, mainly in the hands of few individuals. The systems are poor, not representing their own ethnic groups or society or women, etc. Then the consequences will be that there will be a war, another war. Whatever you name it, another war and another use of violence, because I don't think silencing the guns means peace. Peace is beyond just, putting the guns down. And then the other fear people has is lack of opportunities. Millions of people are jobless. Can you believe it? Especially the impact of this on women of Afghanistan, because a lot of these women who were working, they were the breadwinners of their families. So when they are asked to stay home until further notice, and those men are not paid, people have no hope that they will return to a normal life back. When I was in Kabul, most of my time was engaged. I spent, or I invested my time in talking to the people that it will be all right. It will be okay. I remember in Saturday morning, just last Saturday morning, a female teacher called me from one of the provinces and said, "Ms. Kufi, call me back." For a second, I thought, why should I call her back? If she wants to talk to me, she should continue. But then I called her back and I said, she said, I didn't have enough credit to keep the conversation. I am at school. And the moment she said that, she became emotional and she started crying. She said, I'm at school, I'm teaching grade 9. I'm now at school being told that the only up to grade 6, which is 12 years old, can go to school, not beyond that, until further notice. I remember from the time that Taliban were in power in 2001, I was in Kabul all my life, and hopefully it will be only a few days abroad. I will return back to Afghanistan. But, at the time that I was in Afghanistan, the first time Taliban took power, I remember that they said until further notice, girls cannot go to school and that further notice was temporary, but it became permanent. So the people fear is that these temporary measures also become a permanent base. And in fear of all of that, people are desperate to leave the country. And I think the US, although I'm very upset, I must say, with due respect to all of you, but with your politicians, there was a question in the chat that when you said Biden won and it deteriorated the situation, why you think if Biden did not win, the situation was different? I'm not commenting about who should have won the election, the US election. What I'm trying to say is If there was a conditional withdrawal and we could give time for a political settlement instead of hurrying on such a rushed manner, if we could use our political leverage, the world especially, on the region, on Taliban, to agree on a political settlement, I am sure things would have been different. I have a faith, I had a faith on that. But instead of that, they pressurized, the military withdrawal. So therefore, I think a lot of people are actually disappointed, desperate. I know it's not easy. Whoever I have talked to, even if it's an ordinary Afghan or high level or politician or civil society activist, their hearts are still in Afghanistan. Nobody actually, Charles, believed that this will happen in a way it has had. Most of us, I have invested my blood. And for us, for all of us, these are unbelievably emotional days. We are undergoing enormous level of mental torture right now for what has happened. We blame ourselves for not being good leaders, and we trusted our friends, and we are in a situation that we are now, and this could have been avoided.
Thank you for such heartfelt comments and for being open with us about the difficulties that you've experienced and what others are experiencing. I would like to turn to Mr. Dostiar to hear your comment or response to something that Mrs. Kufi or Ambassador Adelton said.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that maybe I'll just flag one or two quick points. Number one, in line with what Mrs. Kufi said, I believe that the situation is dire and that it needs attention. We need a coordinated, strong voice for the people of Afghanistan by the international community. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is not many people are taking leadership right now. What we need is global leadership in this situation. And so if some countries are stepping out, international organizations like the United Nations, for example, should step in and play a larger role. Unfortunately, people have many people that I have spoken to believe that the UN could do more, could have done more, and can still do a lot more. I think that there's still time to work for a political settlement and that we should press on to that. The fact that there is not a government announced yet, the fact that that many people are concerned about the situation, not only Afghans, but people in the region and the global community, all lead us to believe that there is an opportunity still, even though that window may be very, very small. I would like to say to our American colleagues and friends that it's not over. And so we should not give up on Afghanistan. It is not over. You have a partner in the Afghan people. Afghanistan has changed. I would like to invite the audience today that when they see news pieces, they go beyond that. They go much deeper than what you see. There are certain narratives about Afghanistan that sometimes when I see as an Afghan, that makes me uncomfortable. Even referring to Afghanistan as the graveyard of empires, as a place that cannot be governed, as a place that has a civil war. These are not complete pictures of our country. There's much more to it. To say that this is a place that cannot be governed is putting the responsibility on the land, on the people. While what that really means is I couldn't do it. I could not govern, I could not lead. And so we have to take responsibility. We have to step up and take the lead and do things. It's not just an Afghan problem. It is a regional problem. It is a global problem. And yes, Afghans are taking responsibility. You have a partner in the Afghan people. There's a vibrant diaspora now. None of these people will stay calm. None of us who are outside even right now, we don't know when we will be able to go back. We will not want to have a normal 9-to-5 job. We want to work for our country, and you have a partner in us. So thank you so much, Professor Ramsey. Thank you so much to Baylor University for organizing this event. I think that I'll stop at that. Thank you.
As you were speaking, images were coming to mind of so many of our servicemen, our soldiers and diplomats, NGO workers, who during the Kabul airport evacuation sprung into action and took such a personal concern. And I think what I was hearing that is a sense of friendship and loyalty and admiration for their Afghan friends and counterparts. For many who have been to Afghanistan and who have spent time with Afghan people, there's a relationship that is formed, and I believe it'll endure the test of time. But as I was hearing of those evacuations, and it's been in the news a lot this week, it was people with those connections who were working the phones and calling and writing. And to me, that was a testimony to what they saw there, the hope, the friendship, the sense of indebtedness to those relationships and personal commitments. Let me hear from Dr. Alton on any last comments or responses that you have from what you've heard.
Yeah, just to pick up on a couple things, and I think that our Afghan guests are the most credible and the most moving and the most passionate as well in terms of their country. And I was privileged to be there for 1 year, and earlier visits as well left a deep impression for all kinds of reasons. And just to emphasize, that country has changed so much. Actually, at one point, this will absolutely astonish people, but the banking system on cell phones, I heard at some places, was higher than many other countries in the world, including some states in the US in terms of the use of phones. When I was in the US last time, I bought in Kroger raisins that said product of Afghanistan. Here I am in Pakistan, and I buy pomegranate juice that says product of Kandahar. And, I think Arif mentioned the economic ties. I think that there's definitely, that kind of things as well. I think I'm going to close with the way I closed my Dust of Kandahar, which is my own reflection. It was in journal form, came out 3 or 4 years ago. And I do with a little bit of apology to our Afghan friends, because this was my final day in Afghanistan, reflecting on a year, and frankly, a very tough year. I think maybe I'll go ahead and say it, that one of those trips up to Zabul, there were 5 of us that went up there, and I was the only one that came back. It was an IED attack, and 2 of my colleagues were killed, and 2 were injured, 1 very critically. And that's something you live with. And I think, since you mentioned it, Charles, I think it is important to acknowledge the suffering and sacrifice that was there. And that was part of my year as well. I came back after that happened. I accompanied my colleagues to Dover, and then came back for the rest of my assignment. And when I finally left, this is a little bit reflective, but here it is. It's the 26th of August, 2013, which almost 8 years ago. President Karzai is leaving this morning for Islamabad, but the airport scenes are calm enough. Contrast that with a few days ago. Afghanistan and Pakistan somehow need to get along. Check-in procedures went fine, and for once I chose the right line. Gradually, the departure lounge is beginning to fill up. I don't recognize anyone. Prior to typing this, I cleaned my computer screen with the sleeve of my shirt. A thick caking of dust from Kandahar wiped off the face of the earth in seconds, as if it had never been. That's the last diary issue, and I won't go on to read the afterword. The afterword does ask the question, and does, in some sense, have the hope as well, that some of those sacrifices, both by the Afghans, also by the Americans, but also by, and I think that's one thing Americans have completely lost sight of, is the international effort that was involved. I only listed a few of the countries. Shoot, the Mongolian soldiers were there. I used to go up to Kabul airport and thank them for their service in keeping the Mongolian airport safe during those years. I'm keeping the Kabul airport safe. So again, just to end with that, and I did ask that question in the afterward, were those sacrifices in vain? In my heart of hearts, I actually don't believe it, because I believe that when you touch people, it's sort of, it goes beyond, and other people touch other people, and that human contact, that human connection can have a huge difference. And it has had a difference, in the lives of people that were there, in the lives that people touched. And I think has been mentioned as well, the story is not over. It's a new chapter, a different chapter, but the story's not over. And again, thank you, Charles, for bringing this together like this.
A tremendous privilege. Thank you so much. It's hard to imagine a better way to wrap this up than what you said. And when Arif and I were first imagining this, the language for it, facing forward, had actually come from a directive from the sitting Afghan government saying, despite the withdrawal, we're going to face forward. This is far from over. We are going to move our country forward. And no one could predict what happened. But it's from that perspective of saying, yeah, this is not over. The U.S. relationship with Afghanistan is not over. Maybe our troops will not be in the ground, but the commitment there, from what I see, remains strong, and I think it has to be. I would like to just thank each of you for taking time to be with us. I think it's been an hour well spent. On behalf of Baylor University, I would like to say that you are welcome here. If your travels or an opportunity come for you to be with us here and to speak or do some research, please know that you are welcome here, and we're very thankful to you. I would like to offer Mrs. Kufi the final word, though. So we'll turn our attention to you and listen to you gladly.
Oh, thank you so much. The fact that I have highlighted some of the challenges does not mean that Afghanistan has an alternative, at least the people of Afghanistan, when it comes to their strategic partnership with United States. Still, the United States, their people, the enormous gracious support that we have received over the past 20 years. The United States remain our strategic partner. However, I think there was a better way of conducting things. I remember when the whole operation of evacuation was conducted, from tens of friends around the United States, I received calls, messages, not only asking about myself, but asking about other friends and a possible transfer of them to a safe location. The United States still has a role to play. They can use their political leverage to pressurize the Taliban, because I don't think the people of Afghanistan can afford another beginning of another civil war. And that's why we have invested our time and energy to get to a political settlement to avoid another war. I think we need to use the political leverage to establish a government acceptable by people of Afghanistan, is able to respect the rights and liberties of its people. And people of Afghanistan do not demand really very high. Already the women of Afghanistan are in a dire situation. So minimum expectations to be respected as a human being, to have the right to education, to have the right to work, to have the right to have a say in the future of the government. The basic principles of democracy, very basic. I know that elections do not have a good history in Afghanistan, but still there is no alternative to election. And that's why I think the US could still continue to use its pressure, leverage over the politicians, the Taliban, the other political community in Afghanistan. The region, I think, is so critical, that the role of the region, a consensus on safer and secure Afghanistan and stable Afghanistan is in the interest of the region. I hope Afghanistan once again do not become a proxy battlefield for the powers of the region. That is the fear I have at this stage. But I hope, with the support of the world, once again, I repeat what Mr. Doustiar said: the significance role of the United Nations, being supported by its member states. I hope that we will get to a settlement which is agreed upon and respected by everybody. That being said, I really hope that one day we continue to host you again in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan find its space as not only a country that produces military extremism or is the host of military extremism, but a country that has beautiful nature. And you mentioned, Jonathan mentioned some of those. I'm sure if you go from south to east, north to west, the country is such a diverse beauty, rich in culture, full of natural resources. So Afghanistan is a potential for partnership. I thank you, and I stop here.
Thank you. Thank each of you for your time, and each of the participants that joined us for your questions. I hope this will be one of many such encounters, but until then, we depart with thanks, with appreciation and wishing you the very best. So, tashakkur and Khuda Hafiz.